A black woman's ring unlocks a life-changing secret for a millionaire. Have you ever wondered if true healing is possible after betrayal? Watch now to discover the emotional power of forgiveness. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Stories TH for more incredible stories. On a blistering afternoon, Jonathan King found himself stranded on a quiet stretch of road, his Maserati's engine sputtering and smoking. His heart raced as the minutes ticked away, his important meeting with investors looming. Sweat soaked through his crisp shirt, and the hot sun beat down mercilessly on the car. Frustration gnawed at him. How could he, a man who commanded an empire, be stuck in such a ridiculous situation? His reputation and career were riding on this meeting, and here he was, helpless and alone. Jonathan's frustration mounted as he glanced at his watch. He was supposed to be presenting a major project in less than half an hour, but there was no sign of his assistant, no signal on his phone, and no one in sight to help him. He thumped his fist on the steering wheel in frustration, cursing the situation he found himself in. The car, the meeting, his career all felt like they were slipping through his fingers, and the weight of it all was beginning to feel unbearable. As the minutes dragged on, Jonathan's thoughts raced. He thought about the presentation, the one that could define the future of his company, and how much was riding on it. But none of that seemed to matter in the moment. There he was, sitting in his $3,000 suit, helpless on the side of a forgotten road, and the irony of the situation wasn't lost on him. The man who ran a business empire was now stuck in the most basic of situations, unable to fix his car. Just as he was about to give in to the hopelessness of it all, he noticed movement in the distance. A cloud of dust billowed up from a dirt road, and through the haze, Jonathan saw a beat-up pickup truck slowly approaching. His first instinct was to ignore it. After all, who could possibly help him out here? But as the truck came to a halt a few yards away, Jonathan's hope flickered. Maybe, just maybe, someone could lend a hand. The door of the truck creaked open, and a woman stepped out. Jonathan's first reaction was surprise. She didn't look like someone who could help fix his luxury car. She wore faded jeans, a plaid shirt with sleeves rolled up, and her curly hair was tied back into a simple bun. Her appearance was far from glamorous, and in that moment, Jonathan couldn't help but feel a brief, dismissive thought cross his mind. What could she possibly know about luxury cars? But then she looked at him with an assured gaze, and Jonathan couldn't help but notice the confidence in her steps as she approached him. Her dark skin glistened in the harsh sunlight, and there was no sign of hesitation in her manner. She wasn't intimidated by the situation, or by the luxury car she was about to repair. In fact, she looked entirely unfazed, as if this was just another day at work. "Need some help?" she asked, her voice calm and steady, as though she were accustomed to offering assistance in such moments. Jonathan stared at her for a moment, almost in disbelief. He couldn't help the skeptical edge to his voice. "I've got a meeting in 15 minutes. My assistant should be sending someone, but there's no signal around here," he explained, frustration creeping back into his tone. The woman didn't seem bothered by his irritation. Instead, she nodded and approached the engine without saying another word. She leaned over it, her eyes quickly scanning the problem, and Jonathan watched as she effortlessly began to work on it. The cool confidence in her movements surprised him. This wasn't a mechanic who was fidgeting, or unsure this woman knew exactly what she was doing. After a few moments, she straightened up, wiping her hands on her jeans. "It's the cooling system," she said, her voice calm and matter-of-fact. "I can fix it temporarily so you can make it to the city. It won't last long, but it'll give you a few hours." Jonathan blinked in surprise. He had expected her to give up or ask him to call a tow truck, but here she was, offering a quick fix, all while he stood there, feeling utterly useless. He looked at her, a little skeptical. "Are you sure?" Without even glancing at him, she nodded. "I'm a mechanic," she said flatly, as if the fact should have been obvious from the moment she approached the car. Jonathan was about to ask her how she knew so much about luxury cars when he caught himself. It wasn't important right now. What mattered was that she was fixing the problem, and fast. He couldn't afford to waste any more time. As she continued working, Jonathan found himself fascinated by her competence. Her movements were smooth, practiced, almost surgical in their precision. There was no hesitation, no wasted energy, just a focus that seemed to put his own sense of urgency to shame. The longer he watched her work, the more impressed he became. 5 more minutes and you would have blown the engine completely, she commented casually, adjusting something Jonathan couldn't even identify. These models are powerful, but surprisingly delicate, like some people, she added, her voice drifting as she focused on the engine. Jonathan felt a flash of surprise at her words, but it was gone almost as quickly as it appeared. There was no time to dwell on it. He glanced at his watch again. He was running out of time. As she closed the hood, she looked up at him and said, "That should get you into town." Relief flooded through him. "I owe you one," he said, his voice softer now, genuinely grateful. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a few bills, handing them to her. "Please accept this as thanks." It was then, as she reached out to take the money, that Jonathan saw it, the ring. A delicate silver band with a small blue sapphire stone, almost too elegant for someone who worked on cars all day. His heart skipped a beat as he stared at the ring, recognition flashing in his mind. For a split second, everything else faded away. That ring. It wasn't just any ring. It was the same one that belonged to the girl he had promised to return to all those years ago. His mind raced as memories flooded back. A promise made under a tree, the last gift from a girl he had abandoned. His voice shook as he asked, "Where did you get that ring?" Maya instinctively closed her fist around the ring, her eyes narrowing slightly. "It was my mother's," she replied, but there was something in her gaze now, a caution, a wariness that hadn't been there before. Jonathan's heart thudded in his chest. Could it be? Could she be the same girl from his past? The one he had promised to return to but never did? The silence between them was thick, and Jonathan realized with a jolt that his entire life had just collided with the past he had tried to forget. As Maya walked back to her truck without saying another word, Jonathan stood frozen, his thoughts spiraling. He had no idea how this woman, this mechanic, could be connected to his past, but one thing was certain. This was just the beginning of a journey that would force him to confront the secrets he had buried long ago. He stood there for a moment longer, watching as she disappeared into the distance, the weight of the unanswered questions pressing on him, the ring, the memories, the promise. This wasn't just an encounter with a stranger. This was fate knocking on his door. As the sound of her truck faded into the distance, Jonathan knew his life was about to change. Jonathan watched in disbelief as the woman, who had only moments ago been a stranger offering help, now took charge of the Maserati with an ease that left him both surprised and impressed. The engine, a complex tangle of metal and wires, hissed under the pressure of the heat, but she worked with the confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Every move she made seemed deliberate and calculated, as though she were performing a carefully choreographed routine that Jonathan couldn't even begin to understand. His initial skepticism had quickly given way to something else, curiosity. He had expected her to fumble through the repair, or at best, offer him a temporary fix that would buy him just enough time to get to the nearest mechanic. But what he was seeing was something entirely different. The way she assessed the problem, how her hands moved with precision as she adjusted the various parts of the engine. It was clear this wasn't just a woman helping out of kindness. She was a professional. Jonathan's gaze followed her movements as she leaned over the engine, her strong hands working in harmony with the delicate parts. She wasn't rushing. There was no frantic scrambling or uncertainty. Instead, there was a calmness in her demeanor that stood in stark contrast to his rising panic. His mind raced as he struggled to get a grip on the situation. How could she possibly know this much about a luxury car, one that he had only ever driven to impress clients and investors? How could someone like her, dressed in worn jeans and a plaid shirt, know more about a car that cost more than most people's houses? He opened his mouth to ask, but his words caught in his throat. She wasn't the type to make small talk. She didn't need to explain herself. She simply worked, each movement a reminder of her confidence and expertise. Her hands, small but sure, moved with such grace and efficiency that Jonathan almost felt embarrassed by his own lack of knowledge. In that moment, he realized how little he actually understood about the world around him. Here was a woman, not caught up in the trappings of wealth or status, yet she seemed more capable than most of the people he dealt with on a daily basis. 5 more minutes and you would have blown the engine completely, she said matter-of-factly, her voice calm and measured as she continued to adjust the cooling system. Jonathan blinked, surprised by her directness and how nonchalantly she explained the severity of the situation. There was no fear, no hesitation, just a quiet confidence that made Jonathan question everything he thought he knew. Her words lingered in the air long after she had spoken. These models are powerful, but surprisingly delicate, like some people. The remark, while seemingly simple, carried an undercurrent of meaning. It was almost as if she were speaking from experience, as if she understood something about fragility that Jonathan didn't. Was she speaking about the car, or was she alluding to something deeper, something about people? Her tone was so casual that it almost made Jonathan feel as though he had missed something important. Despite himself, Jonathan's curiosity grew. Who was this woman, really? She seemed to possess a level of knowledge and poise that most people, especially those in his world, lacked. He had worked with brilliant minds, powerful executives, and world-renowned investors, but none of them carried the same quiet assurance that this woman did. As she worked, Jonathan found himself momentarily transfixed, watching her hands move with surgical precision. There was no wasted effort, no unnecessary movements. Everything she did seemed purposeful, honed by years of practice. She didn't need his approval or recognition. She was simply doing what she was good at, and that, in its own way, was both humbling and fascinating to Jonathan. He thought about asking her more about her background, how she had come to know so much about high-end cars, but the question stuck in his throat. It felt intrusive, almost inappropriate. She hadn't asked him about his life, his work, or the Maserati. She was simply here to fix the car, and that was enough for her. The thought left Jonathan unsettled. In a world where everyone seemed to be jockeying for attention, for recognition, this woman was different. She didn't need validation from anyone, and that made her seem almost otherworldly to him. When she finally stepped back from the car, wiping her hands on a rag, Jonathan was left with a strange feeling in his chest. She had fixed the car, made it functional again, despite the seeming impossibility of the task, and yet he was still left with so many unanswered questions. Who was she really? How had she learned this trade, and what else was she capable of? Jonathan hesitated before speaking, unsure of what to say. How do you know so much about cars like this? He asked finally, though it felt like the wrong question. He wasn't just asking about her mechanical skills, he was asking about the enigma that was Maya Turner. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she closed the hood of the Maserati, wiped her hands, and gave him a level look. Excellence isn't exclusive to big cities, she said, her voice even, as if she had said the words 1,000 times before. I work here because I care about my craft. I don't need a fancy office to be good at what I do. The words hung in the air between them, and Jonathan felt a slight pang of guilt. She wasn't looking for recognition or accolades. She simply wanted to do her job well, something he hadn't truly understood until now. It wasn't about status or power or wealth. It was about the satisfaction of doing something you were proud of, something that mattered. As Maya gathered her tools and turned to leave, Jonathan's mind raced with everything he had just witnessed. He had spent his life climbing to the top, accumulating wealth, power, and prestige. But here, in the middle of nowhere, in the heat of the day, Maya Turner had shown him something he had never truly understood before. The power of quiet confidence, the value of expertise, and the true meaning of hard work. Jonathan watched her walk away, the sound of her truck's engine rumbling to life as she drove off. For a brief moment, he was left in stunned silence, his thoughts swirling. What was it about this woman that had made him question so much about his own life? As Maya extended her hand to accept the payment, Jonathan's eyes were drawn to the delicate silver ring on her finger. The band was thin but elegant, with a small blue sapphire set in the center. At first, Jonathan barely registered the significance of the piece. He was too focused on the immediate relief of the car being fixed. But then, as his gaze lingered on the ring, something stirred deep inside him. His heart skipped a beat, and a rush of memories flooded his mind. The ring. He had seen that ring before. It was unmistakable. A blue sapphire, the very same ring he had once given to a girl many years ago. A girl with wide, innocent eyes, and a promise that Jonathan had failed to keep. The memories crashed into him with surprising force, as though he were transported back in time, standing beneath the shade of a large tree, her small hand in his as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It had been a simple promise, one that he had made without fully understanding the weight of it. He had told her that he would return for her, that he would make things right, that they would build a future together. And then life had swept him away his ambitions, his career, his world of power and luxury, and he had broken that promise without ever looking back. Jonathan's pulse quickened as his mind raced. The realization hit him like a wave, and he felt his chest tighten. Could it be? Could this woman, the mechanic who had fixed his car, be the very same girl he had promised to return to all those years ago? His eyes fixed on the ring as Maya held out her hand, ready to accept the money he had offered. The sight of it, so small and delicate against the calluses of her work-worn hands, struck him with an intensity he hadn't anticipated. He hesitated. His throat went dry. The words that had formed on his lips moments ago were now stuck, tangled in a mix of shock and disbelief. This wasn't just a chance encounter anymore. This was fate, an unexpected reunion with someone from his past, someone he had forgotten, someone he had hurt. "Where did you get that ring?" Jonathan asked, his voice trembling slightly, betraying his inner turmoil. He couldn't help it. The question slipped out before he could stop himself. The moment the words left his mouth, he knew he had said more than he intended. Maya paused. The air seemed to grow still between them as she slowly withdrew her hand, her fingers curling protectively around the ring. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. There was a guardedness in her eyes now, something Jonathan hadn't noticed before. The warmth in her face that had been so evident when she helped him with the car was now replaced with a careful caution. "It was my mother's," she replied simply, her voice even, yet there was a subtle shift in her tone. She wasn't quite defensive, but there was something in her words that felt guarded, as though the ring and the memory it evoked was something she wasn't ready to share. Jonathan's breath caught in his chest. His mind raced as he tried to piece together the fragments of his past. His memory of that day, that promise, flooded back in full force. It had been 20 years, 20 long years since he had last seen her, since he had left her behind. And yet, here she was, standing in front of him, wearing the very ring he had placed on her finger all those years ago. The connection between them seemed impossible, but the recognition was undeniable. His heart pounded in his chest as he struggled to process what he was feeling. Was it really her? Was this woman, the one who had just fixed his Maserati with an ease that both awed and humbled him, really the same girl he had abandoned? A wave of guilt washed over him. He had failed her. He had left without a word, consumed by his own ambitions, and now fate had brought them together again in the most unexpected of ways. The years had changed them both, but the ring, the symbol of his promise, remained the same. Jonathan's mind swirled with emotions he hadn't felt in years. Regret, guilt, and longing all mixed together. He wanted to ask more, to understand what had happened, but the words seemed to elude him. The shock of recognition left him speechless. Maya, sensing his silence, turned away, tucking her hands into her pockets. "If the car breaks down again, you'll find my shop about 10 miles from here," she said, her voice cool, detached. "First entrance, after the Aurora City sign." Jonathan stood there, staring after her, feeling as though he had just missed something crucial. He wanted to stop her, to ask more questions, but he couldn't. His meeting his work still lingered in the back of his mind, pulling him away from this unexpected moment. But the ring, that single piece of jewelry, had unraveled something inside him, something he wasn't sure he was ready to face. As Maya walked toward her truck, Jonathan's thoughts were in turmoil. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a random encounter. She had to be the one. The woman who wore his promise on her finger. The woman he had promised to return to. The one he had abandoned. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. There would be time for answers. Later, there had to be. But for now, all he could do was watch as she drove away, leaving him standing on the side of the road, lost in a sea of memories and unanswered questions. The ring and everything it represented was still there, hanging in the air between them, as fragile and powerful as ever. The moment Maya mentioned that the ring had belonged to her mother, Jonathan's heart skipped a beat. His chest tightened, and for a moment, the world around him seemed to blur. The weight of the words hung in the air between them like a heavy fog, and his mind went into overdrive, trying to process what he had just heard. The ring. His mind snapped back to that long-forgotten memory, the one he had buried deep beneath years of business deals, corporate mergers, and the relentless pursuit of success. It was the same ring, the very same one he had once given to a girl with a promise. The ring had been a symbol, a token of a future he had promised but never delivered on. A promise he had made when he was younger, before ambition had taken over and led him down a path where promises meant little. Jonathan's mind raced as his body seemed to freeze in place. The shock of the realization was like a punch to the gut. The woman standing before him, the one who had fixed his car with such ease, was more than just a stranger. She was connected to his past in a way he never expected, something he hadn't thought about in years, something he had hoped to forget. A whirlwind of emotions flooded his chest: disbelief, guilt, and a sharp, bitter regret. The memories came flooding back. The girl he had once loved, the promise he had made under that old tree. The ring had been a token of his commitment, a way to bind them together, even if he had never truly intended to return for her. He had left, moved forward, convinced that his career and his future would be defined by something else, something grander. But here she was, standing before him, wearing the ring that symbolized his broken promise. He swallowed hard, trying to steady himself. His palms felt clammy, and the tension in his chest made it hard to breathe. The ring, that small, delicate piece of jewelry, had become the catalyst for a flood of emotions he had long tried to bury. He had thought he had moved past it, all had convinced himself that the past didn't matter. But now, the past was staring him in the face, and he couldn't escape it. The weight of his failure, the regret of leaving someone behind, crushed him in that moment. His mind was in a fog, and he found himself struggling to form words. He wanted to ask her everything: how she ended up here, why she was so calm, why she had never confronted him before, but the words wouldn't come. All he could do was stand there, his mind spinning in a whirlwind of guilt and disbelief. How had this happened? How had his past managed to catch up with him so suddenly, in the most unexpected way? Maya, for her part, didn't seem to notice the storm raging inside him. She simply stood there, watching him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. She didn't look angry or resentful. There was just a quiet, controlled stillness about her, as if she had long ago come to terms with the past, even if Jonathan hadn't. She didn't ask for an apology or explanation. She simply stated the facts, as if she knew this moment was inevitable. Her calmness, in the face of everything Jonathan was feeling, only added to the tension. She seemed unaffected by the truth that had just been revealed. Her life had clearly moved on, but Jonathan's was now in a state of turmoil. The weight of his own actions, or inaction, hit him harder than he ever anticipated. His professional life had always been so structured, so controlled, but now, standing before Maya, he realized just how much he had neglected the personal promises he had made. Jonathan opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His throat was dry, his chest tight. He wanted to say something, anything, to make sense of the situation, but he couldn't find the right words. How could he explain what had happened? How could he justify the years that had passed without him even trying to find her, to make things right? Maya's voice broke through his thoughts, soft but steady. "It doesn't matter anymore," she said, her words simple yet heavy with meaning. "What's done is done. But the ring, it's the only thing that's ever kept me connected to that life, to the promise he made, to the future we could have had." Jonathan's heart ached at her words. There was a quiet strength in her voice, but also a deep sadness, one that came from years of living with the weight of unfulfilled promises. He could see now that Maya had carried the burden of that promise for far longer than he ever had. The truth hit him like a ton of bricks. He had abandoned her, but she had never stopped holding on. The ring, which had once symbolized his commitment, had become a constant reminder of what he had failed to do. As Maya turned away to gather her tools, Jonathan's mind swirled with emotions he couldn't control. He was caught between wanting to make amends, to ask for forgiveness, and the crushing realization that time had passed and that forgiveness might never come. How could he ever hope to fix what he had broken all those years ago? The silence between them grew heavy, and Jonathan stood still, frozen in the face of his own guilt. The world seemed to close in on him, the past and present colliding in a way he hadn't expected. In the end, he realized that the ring, that small piece of jewelry, had become more than just a symbol of his broken promise. It had become the key to unlocking everything he had tried to forget. And now, standing in front of Maya, he was forced to confront the truth, something he had avoided for far too long. As she drove away, Jonathan stood there, overwhelmed by the weight of his realization. The past had come rushing back with a force that left him breathless, and he knew he couldn't run from it any longer. The question was no longer how he could avoid the truth, but how he could face it and make it right. But that, for the first time in years, was something he wasn't sure how to do. As Maya walked away, Jonathan stood frozen in place, his mind racing. The sound of her truck fading into the distance was all he could hear, a dull reminder of the powerful realization that had just struck him. His heart pounded in his chest as the weight of the past threatened to swallow him whole. How had this happened? How had this woman, this mechanic, brought back memories he had worked so hard to forget? The past, long buried and sealed away under years of success and ambition, had come rushing back to him in one single moment, and he wasn't sure he could handle it. Jonathan's thoughts spiraled. He thought about the promise he had made, the one that had been so simple and sincere back then. He had been young, idealistic, and convinced that everything would fall into place. He had been so certain of his future with her. But life had pulled him in a different direction, and somewhere along the way, he had forgotten about the girl he had promised to return to. His mind raced back to that day, the last day he had seen her, the day he had left without a word, leaving behind the promise that now seemed like nothing more than a naive dream. He had abandoned her, choosing his career over his personal commitments, and the guilt that washed over him now felt suffocating. How could he have done that? How could he have walked away from someone he had cared for, from someone who had trusted him with her heart? The emotional weight of it all hit Jonathan like a ton of bricks. His palms were sweaty, and he found himself struggling to catch his breath as the memories flooded back. The promise he had made to her seemed so distant now, but the ring, the sapphire ring she was wearing, had brought it all back. In that moment, he realized just how much he had lost, how much he had failed her. But as Jonathan stood there, battling his own remorse, Maya, unaware of his internal struggle, continued on her way. She was calm, composed, almost unaffected by the weight of the past that had just resurfaced for Jonathan. It was clear that she had learned to bury her emotions long ago, to hide the pain of a broken promise, just as she had hidden the truth about who she really was. Despite her tough exterior, Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that Maya had been silently carrying the weight of betrayal for years. He saw it in the way she held the ring, how she instinctively protected it as if it were the last thread connecting her to a past she could never fully let go of. She hadn't forgotten him. She hadn't forgotten the promise he had made to her and the years of abandonment that had followed. And yet, despite all that, she had built a life without him, one that didn't include the man who had once promised her the world. Jonathan's mind churned with a mix of emotions, guilt, regret, and a strange sense of awe for the woman who had silently endured the pain of his broken promises. He couldn't help but wonder what her life had been like. What had she gone through all these years? Had she moved on, or had she carried the pain with her, just as he had carried the weight of his mistakes? As he stood there, lost in thought, the world around him seemed to stand still. Time had passed, but the connection between them, however fractured, was still there. The ring, the promise, the unresolved feelings, it all hung in the air, unresolved, just like the two of them. The emotional stakes rose higher with each passing second. Jonathan was torn between his own regret and the overwhelming desire to make things right, to find some way to atone for his mistakes. But what could he do? Was it even possible to fix the damage he had done? Was it too late to reclaim the connection they once had? Meanwhile, Maya continued her path, unaware of the turmoil she had stirred in Jonathan. She climbed into her truck, her expression unreadable, and drove off, leaving him standing there with a heavy heart. Jonathan knew, deep down, that the past wasn't something he could just walk away from anymore. It had found him unexpectedly, and now he had to face it. What he didn't know was that Maya, despite her cold and detached exterior, had been living with the same emotional burden all these years. The promise he had broken, the love they had shared, it had never left her. She had carried it quietly, buried deep inside, not knowing whether he would ever return, not knowing if he would ever remember what he had promised. The scene left both Jonathan and the audience on edge, wondering what would come next. Would Jonathan find the courage to confront the past and try to make amends? Would Maya ever allow him to do so? The unanswered questions hung in the air, leaving a lingering sense of suspense. The past had collided with the present, and now both Jonathan and Maya were forced to reckon with the consequences of the promises that had been made and broken. Jonathan couldn't shake the images of Maya and the ring from his mind. The sense of shock and disbelief had only grown stronger in the hours following their brief encounter, and he found himself restless, unable to focus on the tasks at hand. His business meeting was forgotten, the important project no longer at the forefront of his thoughts. It was her Maya who consumed his every thought. The weight of the past, the promise he had made, and the life he had left behind, all came crashing back in a flood of emotion. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that he needed answers. The connection between them had never truly been severed, even though the years had put miles between them. He needed closure, some kind of understanding of how they had arrived at this point. He couldn't ignore the pull he felt to find her again, to confront the truth, and perhaps find a way to make things right. So, without fully understanding why, Jonathan found himself making his way to the address Maya had given him. The distance between them had always felt like a chasm, but now, in the face of unresolved emotions and painful memories, it seemed like a bridge that he had to cross. He drove, the hours passing unnoticed, until he finally arrived at the small workshop on the outskirts of town. The faded sign above the door read, Hope Mechanical, a name that felt more like an omen than a title. As he parked his car, the weight of what he was about to do settled heavily on his shoulders. Jonathan took a deep breath before stepping out of the car, his hand instinctively reaching for the old wooden brooch in his pocket. It was the only piece of their past that he still had, a small, carved bird with outstretched wings. Maya had given it to him when they were young, a token of their friendship, a reminder of their shared dreams. Back then, it had seemed so simple, so full of promise. But now, it felt like a symbol of everything he had lost. He had held on to it all these years, a keepsake of a time he wished he could forget and yet couldn't. He walked toward the door of the shop, each step heavier than the last. As he pushed it open, the familiar scent of motor oil and metal greeted him, but there was nothing familiar about the place. It was small, cramped, and worn down, but there was an undeniable sense of purpose in the air. Maya was working in the back, her hands covered in grease as she adjusted a car engine. Her focus was absolute, and for a moment, Jonathan simply watched her. She was a woman now, strong and independent, but there was something in the way she moved, something that still reminded him of the girl he had once known. He cleared his throat, and Maya turned to face him. Her expression was unreadable, but Jonathan could see the flicker of recognition in her eyes. The tension between them was immediate, thick and heavy. She didn't say anything at first, but the silence spoke volumes. He could feel her wariness, the caution she had built up over the years. She had every right to be guarded. "I came to return something," Jonathan said, his voice rough, betraying the emotions he was trying to keep in check. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the wooden brooch, holding it out to her. "I've kept it all these years. I thought you might want it back." Maya's eyes flickered to the brooch, and her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't immediately take it from him, instead looking at it as though she were unsure whether to accept it. Her gaze moved from the brooch to his face, and for a moment, the weight of their shared history hung in the air, unspoken but undeniable. Finally, she reached out and took it, her fingers brushing against his. Jonathan felt a jolt at the contact, as if the years of separation had melted away in an instant. For the briefest of moments, he saw a flash of something in her eyes. Was it pain? Regret? Or was it just the ghosts of memories long buried, rising to the surface once more? "I never thought I'd see this again," she said, her voice quiet, almost wistful. She held the brooch in her hand, turning it over, her gaze softening as her fingers traced the edges of the carving. Jonathan stepped closer, his heart racing. "I never forgot you, Maya. I didn't know how to come back. I thought I could move on, that everything would just work out. But when I saw you again, when I saw the ring, I had to find you. I had to make sense of it." Maya's eyes narrowed slightly, and she folded her arms across her chest, her posture defensive. "You should have thought about that before you left," she said, her voice tinged with something sharp, something that Jonathan couldn't quite place. "Before you broke your promise." The words hit him like a slap, and he flinched, a mix of guilt and regret flooding his chest. She was right. He had broken his promise, and no amount of explaining could undo the years of hurt he had caused her. The tension between them was palpable, the weight of their shared past making it difficult to speak. "I'm sorry," Jonathan whispered, the words feeling inadequate in the face of everything that had happened. "I'm sorry for what I did to you, for leaving you without a word." Maya didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked down at the brooch in her hand, her expression softening as her fingers gripped it tightly. For a moment, she was quiet, lost in her own thoughts. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, more vulnerable than before. "You were never supposed to leave," she said, her voice almost breaking. "You promised me you'd come back. You promised that we'd be together. But you never did. And all this time, I've carried that promise with me, wondering if you'd ever remember, if you'd ever care enough to come back and make things right." Jonathan's heart ached at her words, and he stepped closer, reaching out as if to touch her, but he stopped himself. The distance between them, both physical and emotional, was too vast to bridge with a single gesture. Instead, he stood there, feeling the weight of her pain and his own guilt bearing down on him. As Maya looked up at him, there was a flicker of something, maybe hope, maybe doubt, but it was quickly replaced by the quiet strength she had carried for so long. "We can't change the past," she said, her voice steady once more. "But I'm not the girl you left behind, Jonathan. I've built my life, and so have you. I don't know if we can ever go back to what we were, but I'm not that person anymore." Jonathan's chest tightened. Her words stung, but they also brought a strange sense of relief. Maybe the past couldn't be fixed, but they had both survived it. They had both moved on, and maybe that was enough. As he looked at Maya, he realized that the journey they had started all those years ago had taken them in different directions. But the truth they were confronting now about their shared history and the pain they had both carried was something they could finally face together. And though the past would always be a part of them, it no longer had to define them. The brooch, once a symbol of their lost promises, now felt like a step toward healing. And perhaps, just perhaps, this unlikely reunion could be the beginning of something new. As the conversation between Jonathan and Maya deepened, so did the layers of mystery that had surrounded their pasts. What began as a simple reunion, sparked by the forgotten promise and the connection to a ring, gradually unfolded into a far more complicated and dangerous truth. The closer they got to the heart of the matter, the clearer it became. Their lives had been intertwined in ways neither of them had expected, with deceit and betrayal playing a central role in their shared history. Jonathan's adoptive father, a man he had trusted his entire life, seemed to have a hand in something far darker than Jonathan could have ever imagined. For years, he had accepted the story that his father had built the family empire from the ground up, that their wealth and success had come from hard work and strategic investments. But as the truth began to unravel, Jonathan's world shifted beneath him. Maya, with her quiet but determined resolve, had spent years piecing together the story of her family's downfall. She knew the truth about the land that Jonathan's family now controlled, that had been the foundation of the Weber Empire. What Jonathan didn't know, and what Maya had only recently discovered, was that the land had once belonged to her family. It had been taken from them through fraudulent means, with manipulation and deceit at the core of the transaction. Her family had been forced out, their land stolen under the guise of legal contracts that had been forged and altered. Jonathan's face grew pale as Maya revealed the details. The once powerful Weber family had not built their empire through hard work alone. They had done so on the backs of others. Maya's family had been systematically destroyed, not through natural disaster or poor decisions, but by the deliberate actions of Jonathan's father and others in their circle. This revelation shocked Jonathan to his core. The business his family had prided itself on, the wealth and influence they had amassed, were built on a foundation of lies. Jonathan's heart sank as he realized that everything he thought he knew about his own history had been distorted, manipulated for personal gain. As Maya spoke, her voice trembling with the anger she had held for years, Jonathan could feel the weight of her words crushing him. She described how her family had fought back in every legal way they could, but the power and influence of the Weber family were too great. Documents had been forged, signatures falsified, and deals made behind closed doors. Maya's parents had tried to take the matter to court, but the system was rigged in favor of those with money and power. It was a battle they couldn't win, and as the years passed, the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Her family's wealth was gone, and their land, rich with resources, was now the crown jewel of the Weber Empire. Jonathan felt a surge of disbelief mixed with outrage. He had spent his life believing his adoptive father was a man of integrity, a businessman who had earned his success. But now, he was faced with the horrifying truth that his father had not earned anything fairly. Everything had been stolen ruthlessly, systematically, and with a level of cold calculation that chilled Jonathan to the bone. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" Jonathan's voice cracked as he asked, the frustration and anger building inside him. He looked at Maya, feeling the weight of their pasts closing in on him. Maya's expression was one of quiet resolve. "I didn't have the power to do anything about it back then," she replied, her voice steady despite the emotions roiling beneath the surface. "But now I have the truth, and I'm not going to let your family get away with it anymore." The revelation felt like a punch to Jonathan's gut. Everything he had known about his family, his identity, had been built on a lie. His father had manipulated him, raised him as his own, all while hiding the truth of how the family fortune had been made. Jonathan had always been proud of his name, his legacy, but now that legacy felt like a tainted, bitter thing. His entire sense of self was beginning to unravel. Maya continued, her words cutting through the tension that had built between them. "I've spent years trying to uncover the truth about my family's land, and I found it. Your father's signature on documents that were meant to be destroyed. He didn't just steal the land, he destroyed my family's future to build his empire." The anger inside Jonathan swelled, mingling with a deep sense of guilt. How could he have been so blind? How could he have spent years under the false illusion that everything was earned, that everything was legitimate? He had been complicit in the success of the Weber family, even if he hadn't known it at the time. The weight of the truth began to suffocate him. He had spent so much time focused on building his own career, on achieving success for himself, that he had never stopped to question the foundation on which it was built. Now, as the lies and deceit unfolded, Jonathan found himself at a crossroads. The man he had called father had betrayed him, manipulated him, and used him to further his own agenda. And Maya had been the victim of it all, left to pick up the pieces of a broken family and a stolen legacy. The emotional stakes were higher than ever. Jonathan now had to face the reality of his family's past and figure out what to do with the truth. Would he confront his father? Would he expose the corruption that had built his family's empire, even if it meant tearing it all down? The anger and disbelief he felt were overwhelming, but they were nothing compared to the guilt he now carried. Maya's resolve was clear. She had no intention of letting her family's suffering go unacknowledged, and Jonathan knew that his own path forward would be irrevocably changed by the truths she had revealed. But the question remained, how would he make it right? How could he undo the damage done by years of deceit? The tension between them was palpable, and the audience was left on edge, wondering what Jonathan would do next. Would he stand by his family, or would he find the courage to fight for what was right? The stakes had never been higher. The air was thick with tension as Jonathan and Maya stood in front of his father's office, the weight of the past pressing down on them both. Jonathan's hands trembled slightly at his sides, the anger and disbelief swirling in his chest as he prepared to confront the man who had raised him, the man he had trusted for his entire life. But now, the truth was undeniable. Everything he had believed and everything he had worked for had been built on lies. And standing beside him, Maya held the key to unraveling it all. The door to his father's office opened, and there he was, Ernesto Weber, immaculate as always, exuding the same power and control that had defined him throughout Jonathan's life. But today, something was different. The confident, unshakable patriarch seemed almost fragile, his facade cracking under the weight of the truth that Maya now held in her hands. She stepped forward, her gaze steady as she walked into the room with the documents Jonathan had never expected to see. Maya's hand, holding the yellowed papers, seemed to glow with the power of the truth contained within them. Each page was a revelation proof of the betrayal, the manipulation, and the lies that had built the Weber empire. Jonathan's heart pounded as the realization set in. These documents were irrefutable. The land his family had built their fortune on wasn't theirs. It had been stolen from Maya's family years ago, under false pretenses, and his father had been at the heart of it. "Father, we need to talk." Jonathan's voice was steady, but the nerves underlying his words were evident. He couldn't remember the last time he had addressed his father in this way. This was no longer a son seeking approval. This was a man demanding answers. Ernesto's eyes flicked between Jonathan and Maya, his usual composed demeanor slipping for a moment. He knew what was coming. He had seen the signs, the tension in Jonathan's voice, the way Maya had walked into his office with the papers that would bring his entire world crashing down. Still, he attempted to maintain control, though his eyes were narrowed, the hint of a smile playing at his lips. "What's all this about?" he asked, his voice smooth but with an edge of irritation. "You think I'll just hand over everything now, after all these years?" Maya stepped forward, her eyes unwavering. She placed the documents on the desk with deliberate care. As they landed with a soft thud, it was as though the truth itself had settled into the room, ready to be acknowledged. "This is the truth about your empire, Mr. Weber. The land your family owns, the land you've built your wealth on, was stolen from my family. These documents prove it." Jonathan's heart raced as his father's expression hardened. He watched as Ernesto's eyes flickered down to the papers, his face betraying the faintest hint of panic before he masked it with his usual arrogance. "I don't know what you're talking about," Ernesto said, his voice still calm, but now tinged with the unmistakable tone of someone trying to hold on to power they knew they were losing. "Those papers are nothing but lies, forged documents." Maya didn't flinch. "I've spent years tracking these documents down. They're authentic. The signatures, the contracts, everything you've done to steal my family's land is in here." Jonathan felt the ground shift beneath him as the magnitude of her words hit him. The land that had made his family rich, the land that he had been so proud of, had been stolen. He looked at his father, his entire life up until this point flashing before his eyes. All the accomplishments, all the praise, all the success built on the backs of lies. Jonathan felt a rising tide of rage. He had been blind to the truth, manipulated by the very person he had trusted most in his life. "Why?" Jonathan's voice cracked as the question finally escaped. "Why did you do it, Father? Why take everything from them? Why lie to me, raise me, teach me to believe in something that wasn't true?" Ernesto's face contorted, his control slipping. "You don't understand, Jonathan. I did what I had to do to secure our future." "Your future," he said, his voice rising in anger. "I made this family what it is. You think I could have just let some piece of worthless land stand in the way of our success?" Maya shook her head slowly, the bitterness in her voice clear. "You ruined families for power. You manipulated the system, forged documents, and took what wasn't yours. You didn't just steal land. You destroyed lives. My family's life." Jonathan's world felt like it was shattering piece by piece. He had admired his father for years, looked up to him, believed in the story of their family's success. But now, standing in the room with the man who had raised him, he realized that everything he knew about his family, his legacy, had been a lie. He had been complicit in it all, unknowingly living a life built on corruption and deception. His father's arrogance faltered for just a second, and Jonathan saw something else in his eyes, a flicker of fear. But it was quickly replaced by defiance. "You think you can just destroy everything I've worked for?" Ernesto spat. I built this empire, and I'll be damned if you or anyone else is going to tear it down with your ridiculous accusations. Jonathan felt a surge of anger he had never experienced before. The truth had been right in front of him all along, hidden in plain sight, and he had been too blind to see it. The man who had shaped his life, the man he had trusted above all others, was the very person responsible for the destruction of Maya's family. The betrayal ran deeper than he had ever imagined. The room was charged with tension as the truth hung in the air, the revelation of fraud and family manipulation echoing in their minds. Jonathan took a deep breath, his hands trembling as he made the decision that would change everything. He was no longer the son who looked up to his father. He was a man confronting the lies that had shaped his life. The stakes had never been higher. The future of his family, his legacy, and his relationship with Maya hung in the balance. With one final, resolute step, Jonathan made his choice. He would no longer let his father's empire stand on the foundations of lies. It was time for the truth to be exposed, no matter the cost. The weight of the truth hit Jonathan like a wave, crashing into him with such force that he could barely catch his breath. His entire world, everything he had known, was unraveling in front of him. The revelation that his adoptive father, the man he had trusted above all else, was the one responsible for destroying Maya's family, felt like a betrayal of the highest order. How could the man who had raised him, who had shaped his every belief, have been so heartless? Jonathan felt a surge of disbelief that he couldn't shake. The life he had built, the success he had achieved, all seemed meaningless now. His father, the man who had taught him everything, was at the heart of a web of deceit that had destroyed the lives of innocent people. Maya's family, who had once owned the land that had been the cornerstone of the Weber Empire, had been robbed of their inheritance, their future, their legacy. Jonathan felt a deep anger rising in him, directed at the very person who had once been his role model. As Maya stood beside him, the weight of the documents they had uncovered still in her hands, Jonathan felt the magnitude of the moment. The land, the one that had been stolen from her family and turned into the foundation of his own family's wealth, would finally be returned. The empire his adoptive father had built on lies, manipulation, and fraud was crumbling. For the first time, Jonathan truly saw the extent of the damage his father had done, not just to Maya's family, but to him as well. The anger in Jonathan's chest was now intertwined with something much deeper: disappointment. He had been so blind, so naive, to believe the story his father had told him. The lies he had lived with for so long now felt suffocating, the air heavy with the truth that had finally come to light. But the final blow came when Jonathan discovered the darkest secret of all. As he began to piece together the full extent of the lies, he uncovered something that would forever change his sense of self. He was not the biological son of the Weber family. His entire identity had been fabricated. Jonathan staggered back as the truth pierced him. His father had not only stolen Maya's family's land, but had also taken him in as a child, not because of love or care, but because he was a replacement. He had been adopted into the Weber family for one simple reason: to take the place of the son they had lost. The betrayal was so deep, so profound, that Jonathan could hardly comprehend it. His life, his entire sense of self, had been built on a lie. His name, his heritage, everything he thought he knew about who he was, had been manufactured. The shock was overwhelming. Jonathan felt as though the ground had been ripped out from under him. His father's voice, once a symbol of authority and guidance, now seemed distant and hollow. The heartache of discovering that he was nothing more than a pawn in a larger scheme left him breathless. He had always thought of himself as part of the Weber legacy, proud of his name, his place in the family business. But now, nothing about his identity felt real. As he stood there, staring at the man who had raised him, Jonathan's world seemed to collapse. The anger that had simmered inside him for so long now boiled over. He couldn't stomach the idea of continuing to carry the Weber name. It had become a symbol of everything he despised. With a final, decisive movement, Jonathan renounced his adoptive name. "I'm done," he whispered, the words thick with emotion. "I'm done living this lie. I'm not your son, and I never was." The finality of his words seemed to echo in the silence that followed. Jonathan's heart was pounding, the realization of his entire life being a lie still settling over him. He was not the man he thought he was. The identity he had spent years building, the achievements he had fought for, were meaningless in the face of the truth. And the worst part was that he had spent so much time chasing success, building his own empire, without ever questioning the foundation it was built on. Maya, standing beside him, watched in silence. She didn't say anything, but there was a look of understanding in her eyes. She had known the truth for so long, had carried the pain of her family's loss. But now, Jonathan's pain was clear. He was a man without a name, without a family, without the very foundation that had once given him purpose. As Jonathan stood in the middle of the crumbling empire his father had built, he realized that his journey was far from over. The past had shaped him, yes, but it no longer defined him. He was free now, free to reclaim his own life, to make his own choices, and to find a new sense of identity, not one based on lies, but on the truth that had finally set him free. The weight of the past was still heavy on his shoulders, but for the first time in a long time, Jonathan felt like he could breathe. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but he would walk it on his own terms. And as the Weber Empire crumbled around him, he finally saw that the real legacy he would leave was not the one built on corruption and deception, but the one he would create for himself. The room was thick with anticipation as Maya stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for the door. The air felt heavy with the weight of years lost, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she found herself standing on the threshold of a reunion she had longed for. The pain of the past, the years of uncertainty and heartache, seemed to hang in the air like a storm cloud. But at that moment, there was a flicker of hope that this would be the day everything changed. She pushed the door open, and there, standing before her, was Amelia, the woman who had once been her mother, the woman who had disappeared from her life so long ago. The years had been cruel, but the moment they shared now was everything Maya had imagined. Amelia's face was older, her features worn by time, but her eyes, those eyes were the same. The connection between mother and daughter was undeniable, even after all the years that had passed. Maya. Amelia's voice broke the silence, a whisper filled with emotion. It was soft, hesitant, as though both women were afraid to believe that this moment was real. But Maya could see it, the love, the regret, the longing that had been buried deep in her mother's heart for so long. Without a word, Maya stepped forward, her arms instinctively wrapping around her mother. The embrace was overwhelming, a release of all the emotions that had been building up for years. There were no words at first, only tears, the tears of a mother who had been torn from her child, and the tears of a daughter who had spent her entire life wondering what had happened to the woman she loved. In that moment, all the pain, all the betrayal, and all the years of separation seemed to melt away. Maya finally felt the warmth of her mother's embrace again, the comforting presence she had been denied for so long. And for Amelia, it was the moment she had hoped for, the moment she could finally hold her daughter close after all the years of being apart. Jonathan stood in the doorway, a quiet observer of the emotional scene unfolding before him. His heart ached as he watched the two women, Maya and Amelia, reconnect. He could feel the weight of their pain, the years of lost time, and the deep bond that had been severed but never truly broken. He had been part of this journey, unknowingly standing in the way of their reunion, but now, as he watched them embrace, he understood the true depth of the pain that had been caused by greed, betrayal, and lies. He didn't know what to say. Words seemed inadequate, useless in the face of such raw emotion. But what he did know was that this moment marked the beginning of something new, something that had been denied to Maya and her family for far too long. Maya pulled back slightly, wiping her eyes, her gaze meeting her mother's. There was a quiet strength in her voice when she finally spoke. "We've missed so much time, Mom," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But we have time now. We can start over." Amelia nodded, her tears flowing freely as she cupped Maya's face in her hands. "I'm so sorry, my sweet girl. I never meant for this to happen. I thought I had lost you forever." Maya's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and sadness. The years of wondering, of living with the pain of abandonment, were now behind her. She had her mother back. But the joy of that reunion was tempered by the understanding of what they had both endured in the years they had been apart. Their lives had been shaped by forces beyond their control, and the journey ahead would not be easy. But in this moment, there was a new sense of hope. The years of pain had forged a bond between them that could not be broken. Jonathan's mind was elsewhere, his thoughts racing as he reflected on everything he had learned. The truth about his origins had shaken him to his core. The man who had raised him, the father he had trusted, was responsible for so much pain not just in his life, but in the lives of others, including Maya and her family. The weight of the revelation still sat heavy on his shoulders, but as he watched Maya and her mother reconnect, something inside him shifted. He had been given the opportunity to right the wrongs of the past. He had the chance to be better, to make a difference not just for himself, but for the people he had hurt along the way. As the mother and daughter embraced again, Jonathan stepped forward, his voice breaking the moment. "I'm so sorry," he said, his words raw with sincerity. "For everything. I've learned the truth, and I promise I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." Maya looked at him, her expression softening. She didn't need to hear more. The sincerity in his voice was enough. The past couldn't be erased, but the future was still theirs to shape. Jonathan's apology was just the beginning, a small but important step toward redemption. The scene in that room was one of healing, of long-buried wounds being reopened, but also of the possibility for new beginnings. Maya and Amelia, reunited at last, stood together in the face of everything they had lost, but more importantly, everything they had gained in finding each other again. And Jonathan, though still deeply shaken by the truth of his origins, found a sense of liberation he had never known before. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges and the weight of history, but there was hope now, a hope that came from facing the truth and choosing to move forward, free from the shackles of the past. As the three of them stood together, the emotional weight of the moment gave way to something stronger hope. The past had shaped them, yes, but it would no longer define their futures. The chance for healing, for reconciliation, and for a new beginning had arrived. And for the first time in a long time, they were no longer bound by the mistakes of the past. They were free to choose the life they would build together, one step at a time. One of the most important lessons from this story is the power of forgiveness and how it can lead to healing. Throughout life, we all experience betrayal and disappointment, often from those we trust the most. However, forgiveness allows us to release the burden of anger and regret, freeing us from the past. In the case of Maya and Jonathan, forgiveness becomes the key to reclaiming not only their peace, but also their personal growth. Healing does not happen overnight, but it begins when we choose to let go of past hurts and face the truth, no matter how painful. This story teaches us that no matter how difficult the road may be, it's never too late to seek reconciliation and start anew. For seniors, this is especially relevant, as it reminds us that even in later years, we can still heal old wounds, rebuild relationships, and transform our lives by embracing forgiveness. It's a powerful reminder that healing is possible, and by forgiving ourselves and others, we can begin to live with greater peace and joy. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this story, make sure to hit like and subscribe to Stories TH. Stay tuned for more life-changing content.